Welcome to another program of What People with Disabilities Teach Us. I'm your host, Mike Delaney, and we have a very special program today. We are going to take a look at intellectual disabilities, or as some people put it, developmental disabilities. It was nearly 15 years ago that I met our guest for today. It was not long after September 11th, 2001, that we went through a new faculty orientation there in the communication department at Northern Kentucky University. You, a very promising professor. I just kind of doing my adjunct thing. And we've come a long way. It's hard to imagine, but it's so apropos to mention September 11th because Stephanie Hubbig, in her book, Same Lake, Different Boats, says every parent or every family that has a family member that has a disability goes through their own September 11th.
That's true. I would agree with that.
Yeah, and we would become friends, you and Tracy and I, as well as Christopher, and I would be at Cincinnati Children's Hospital and Medical Center when, in 2005, you all gave birth to Isaac, your son with Down syndrome.
Right.
And you managed it beautifully. You celebrated his birth, but at the same time, I think it would be fair to say there was some trauma.
Definitely.
And in particular, I remember Tracy asking me, because I had a daughter with disabilities, about coping with the future.
And we had the other issue. Isaac also had a heart issue. And in fact, that was almost a bigger deal initially, concerned about that, even compared to Down syndrome. And so that was a lot of the focus because he was in NICU for 10 days. And then he had his first heart surgery at 6 months. And then he's had 2 more since then.
But I think the reference to 2001 or September 11th is cosmic in other ways, and you correct me if I'm mistaken, Zach, because it also is catastrophic in terms of parents and their expectations and their hopes and their dreams. Can you expound on that?
Yeah. So Christopher, our older son, when Isaac was born, he was 13 years old. So there had been quite a long gap between both of our children. When we moved down to Kentucky,
from Illinois.
From Illinois, where we came from, became pregnant with a baby that we lost, and that was after Christopher was like 11 or 12, and in those years in between, we had some financial challenges. I went and did my PhD, and so it really wasn't possible for us during those times to have another child. So this was a big deal when that happened. And so after that miscarriage, about a year later then is when we became pregnant with Isaac. So again, very quick birth, feet first, which was very unusual, but kind of scary too. So that was very traumatic, very different than Christopher's birth, which also was fairly fast, but pretty typical, and really not too difficult. But just from that, the expectations had already, were different than what was actually happening. And then once we got through that, during that night, I remember he was small. I remember noticing his ears being real tiny, which is actually characteristic of a lot of kids with Down syndrome, but not really thinking, it's like, oh, look how little those ears are. But he seemed okay, and Christopher and I left the hospital, and then I got a frantic call from Tracy about 2 hours later, so like 8 o'clock in the morning, saying that they're taking Isaac from her because they are pretty sure he has Down syndrome and that he had a heart condition. And when that conversation happened, because I had just finished calling people and telling them that he was born, and just surprised how early he came and how quick he came. But everything changed, and that really was like a very dramatic event. And I knew a little bit about what Down syndrome was, but I didn't really know a whole lot about it, so I wasn't sure what that meant. And then hearing that he had a heart condition, I remember Christopher and I going to the hospital not knowing, is he going to be alive? What's going to happen here? And that definitely totally changed the perspective of what you would expect with a new baby.
You not only don't know what's going to happen the next 15 hours, you're
No.
also wondering what will happen the next 15 years.
Right.
You have no idea what lies ahead in
No,
life.
not at all. And I knew children with Down syndrome. I think I knew at least that there were developmental delays. Mental retardation was I think I at least had that kind of awareness of it. But I still didn't really know what any of that meant. And it took a long time to kind of figure that out. But the initial part, he was in NICU for 10 days, and so we were mostly focused on him coming home. And when will he get to leave NICU? That was most of so your whole world became going up there every day, and we had to go home, without a baby. Once, like 2 days later, I think, when Tracy went home. But then going back and visiting him, each day and wondering, and he looked pretty good. That was the whole thing, because this heart issue was not an immediate concern. He was going to be, so kind of like, why he seemed a bit out of place there. And so that was another part that was kind of like, I see all these other parents and the other babies that were typically premature and very tiny, and here's Isaac, very large. And the main reason he stayed in so long wasn't even about his heart, it was because he had jaundice and was trying to get the counts back up. And so that kind of, I think initially kind of sidetracked us a bit from the heart issue, but was a lot of our focus about, we just want to get him home and try to figure out how do we do this. Okay.
We met in 2002. You have since achieved tenure and have now been the chair of the communication department for several years, in no small part due to your leadership abilities. You might be modest and want to, but the late Mary Cupito once said to me that she wouldn't have the job. It was too much like herding cats. And therefore, knowing your gentle disposition and yet winsome ways with a lot of folk. And I know but I'm not intentionally laying it on.
Okay.
We've been friends too long. I don't have
We
any
don't have
need
to do that.
No, we don't need to pull one of those legs like that. You have your life has taken turns in different ways. When we first met at that faculty orientation, you said, "Oh, I'm just a generalist in terms of a communications professor." You're not a generalist anymore.
No.
Your scholarship has taken a specific direction,
Right.
because of your son.
Yeah. So my research area was actually looked at the socialization experience of new employees in the workplace, and really looking at the role that communication played in helping new employees adapt to their workplace. And I had been studying that, by the time I was at Northern, at least 7 or 8 years since I started my PhD program. And I continued on that for a number of years after that. Interesting, before Isaac was born, my sister, who's also a professor, she's at Hofstra University, but she works in rehabilitative psychology, and she actually been a job coach in her previous career. She and I were part of a grant where we worked with employees with disabilities on their socialization experience to the workplace, and worked on developing training modules for job coaches. And I had started that project before Isaac was born. So that had kind of happened, and I started, becoming more involved with the disability community at that time. But then, obviously, when he was born, I became involved with the Down Syndrome Association of Greater Cincinnati, helped set up their internship program, and my interests really shifted away from organizational communication to looking at health communication topics, and specifically issues related to initially how diagnoses were communicated to new parents, because our experience was not good, and it's common that happens quite a bit. In fact, the doctor told Tracy that Isaac had Down syndrome without me there in the hospital, was very negative about it. Didn't you know? We didn't do testing. We were a little older when he was born, and we chose not to do genetic testing because we knew it wouldn't change our mind.
We had a similar experience with my daughter.
Yeah, and so it was a very, very negative experience with that doctor. Even in the night before, when he was still in the hospital, one of the nurses was looking at Isaac and giving him his bath, And she called a pediatrician to take a look at him because he was kind of floppy, which again is another indicator of Down syndrome. And that pediatrician actually said, "Oh, he's fine, don't worry about him." And I went home. And it's like knowing more what I know about Down syndrome, he had very obvious signs that was present. And so I do not know how that pediatrician could say that, other than it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and he maybe didn't think that it was I don't know what was going on. But obviously the nurse, I think, knew, but she couldn't say anything. So that really motivated me. That was a terrible experience to learn about that, that how can that be handled differently. So I've really shifted my research focus to looking at that, and I've had a piece published proposing a theoretical model about, and there are lots of guidelines out there from different groups about how to convey that information.
Yeah, you had an article published in November of 2016 in the International Journal of Community Disability and Research.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and that's a theoretical piece that looks at issues like obviously the healthcare providers' communication skills, but also the parents. There's differences in terms of socioeconomic status that make a difference in how they interact. One thing that I know, because in my experiences with Isaac, where I've had to navigate not only medical field, but also the education system, and even just socially, because I'm a professor and a department chair, I know that gives me an advantage sometimes, where people will listen to me more, or I can automatically because of that, and that's okay for me, but that's not necessarily okay for lots of other people who don't necessarily have a position like that. And so that has really motivated me now, or my focus on my research is really looking at the sense-making process for parents of kids with special needs, not only in a medical situation, but an education system, that we are constantly receiving information, seeking out information, and trying to figure out, what does this mean? And I got to make decisions based on this. And I'm really fascinated looking at how that works really over kind of a lifespan. Although my initial focus was just on that, getting that diagnosis. And I think one of the things I've seen in a lot of the research is that we focus a lot on, especially when a child's born with disability, on everything that happens when they're born and in the beginning, and then we kind of act like it gets all better and there's never any other, you don't have any other challenges the rest of your life. And that's not, and you'll see that in a lot of the parent support groups, that they're very focused on, again, the babies and the small children, but that this is a lifelong process. And it may not be that 9/11 trauma type of thing, but there's going to be lots of challenges and smaller traumas along the way that a medical issue might come up. You might have a conflict with the school over the individual education plan, state planning later on in terms of how your child will be provided for after you're gone. And so all of those require us to engage in sense-making behaviors, and some of that's what we're told, some of it is what we look for. Sometimes there's things like, I don't want to know, and I want to just kind of be and exist in my own life. But it is a process that affects how we raise our children and how we make our decisions.
Sometimes it's just, how are we going to get through dinner at the restaurant?
Exactly. It is.
And should we even try to eat at a restaurant?
Right. When you're throwing something, or all of a sudden there's a meltdown or something like that in a public area, yeah, you're thinking, I have to escape from this place. How do I get out?
I'm being judged as a parent
right.
for a child that has behavioral outbursts.
Right.
When if I was in my child's place, I'd be having behavioral outbursts sometimes too. And people don't get that.
No.
They don't get that.
No, because Isaac has some communication issues, and we had to develop our way of communicating with him. I mean, he's verbal, and he does speak, but it's definitely not easy for other folks who don't know him to necessarily understand, and that can create frustration for him at times in terms of getting what he's wanting to do, and that can result in behavior issues at times. And I think you're right, they don't. Often the behaviors that happen, it's typically a communication problem.
And I want to get back to your primary relationships in just a moment, but you've got a book coming out.
I'm starting work on a book that will tell the story of Isaac, and then also collecting stories from other parents, really focused again on this idea of sense making and how we and a lot of the sense making research looks typically at it as a coping mechanism, or how you look at the positive sides, certainly. But I'm also wanting to look at it as how do we use that information to make decisions? Because you have to make a lot of decisions, like any parent does, but even more so when your child has special needs.
And I think this is a good place to pause. I want to hear at this point about what have been some of the best times with Isaac. And I want to inject it at this point because I can imagine some of our viewing audience at this point may be saying, I'm getting nervous, or this is starting to make me feel bad. You want to change the channel or something like that. And it hasn't, for all of that looking into the abyss and not knowing.
Right.
There's been.
Yeah, well, and I think sometimes when you look at the not knowing, you'll focus on the negative side of things. Isaac is a very enthusiastic child. He's very passionate. I feel like for me, he really has stirred up my own ability to be passionate about different things and care about different things. We've taken trips. He's been on an airplane. We went out to Portland, Oregon to go see his grandma and his uncle, and that was a really pretty amazing experience. The plane ride on the plane itself was fine, sitting down. Getting to it necessarily, that was a little harder, or going, getting through security, that's going to be interesting, and we'll see how this works. But we've taken some big road trips as well with it, and those have been some of the kind of, I always talk about them as magical moments with Isaac. And his older brother and he and I, there were, I think, 3 summers in a row. We took one trip out to New York to go see his aunt who lives on Long Island and his cousin. We took another trip to Washington, D.C., and then another trip up to Vermont, and then this other one out to Portland. And those were, there were a lot of challenges along the way, but when I remember those trips, like one of the examples, we went to the Baseball Hall of Fame Museum, and we're big Chicago Cubs fans because we're from Northern Illinois. And of course
you think? Maybe.
Yeah, and Isaac has had to be part of that too, but it's a
Who won the series last year?
Yeah, right. And it's a multi-generational thing. It started with my father. But Christopher he was kind of looking at everything very closely, and he's very detailed oriented about sports statistics, and so he was just thrilled to be there. Isaac is bam. We went 3 floors up and down, and but I still got to experience the museum. I'm chasing him around, but he would stop and he would look at something, and it's like I remember that very fondly as we were there a long time. We just go through everything very quickly, and he'll repeat it again, and so I did get to experience that museum, and a lot of people they found him, they would smile at him, and he would be very engaging. With the folks that were there at that museum. So there's a lot of, those are big trips, but even smaller things like we go out to A.J. Jolly Park, and there's the lake out there, and we will hike around and we'll eat a picnic lunch there. We do things like that, every single week, and those are, he helps me get away from kind of the grind of the daily work life and some of the regular concerns of life, and really focus on, here we are in the park. Let's eat lunch. It's just Isaac and me, and building a connection as a parent and a child, but also paying attention to kind of the small things that are around us.
I'm gonna put you on the spot.
Yeah.
Let's put it in perspective. How do they compare? Do they compare with tenure and becoming chair of a university department?
The experience with Isaac that's more on the emotion side of things. I don't think of tenure quite in that way. That's a professional accomplishment, and certainly very significant.
Do they counterbalance one another?
Sometimes they're in conflict with each other.
In 2001, the church I was serving was named the winner of the Inclusion Award here in Greater Cincinnati in religion. And Norman Kuntz was a celebrated speaker he was the keynote at the awards presentations, and he described a university professor and dean who was quite cerebral, and would encounter another professor who had an autistic son on Sunday mornings, and the autistic son would say, high five, and every Sunday morning greet the dean, who was otherwise a little bit uptight.
Yeah.
And then time passed on, and the university's son well, the university professor moved on and his son, and the dean expressed disappointment that he was no longer around because he said that was the one time he got to step outside of his role.
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm like that, and I don't think even as a department chair that that's a very people-oriented job, because I've got 30 full-time faculty that are in my department, and a lot of what I'm doing is working to support them and help them be successful. But I've had to deal with a whole range of from great successes, but also other faculty and staff that have had some big challenges too. And so there's people that I've had to fire people before in that role, and I've had to had a faculty member not get tenure, and that wasn't pleasant, certainly. But I think there's parts of being Isaac's dad, that have given me the ability to handle those situations. One thing I say about being a department chair is you always have to be kind of used to chaos a little bit, because you never know what's going to happen in that role. And you cannot be this person, and people have this perception, oh, I'm really organized. But if you look at my office, I'm a stacker, not a filer. I mean, I've got stacks of paper. I can remember a lot of things in my head. I use my phone a lot to kind of keep myself organized. But Isaac has given me the ability to be more adaptable to crises that have come up in that role. And I don't know if I would have had that if he had not been my child.
And all of your staff and faculty will appreciate that.
They do, right? They're, I don't want to do that job, And, and higher ed is challenging these days. Budgets are a lot tighter than what they used to be. There's professors aren't necessarily the best people advocating for ourselves because of this kind of academic cerebral part and connecting with other people and kind of saying, well, here's what the value of what I'm doing is. And but I think Isaac has helped me not be that way and be much more passionate and try to say, here's why this is really important.
And I think that's where I was going with it.
Yeah.
He's flesh and blood.
Yes.
And if you get 6 inches off the ground, he brings you back down.
Right. Exactly. I think that's definitely true. And even something like, doing a research study, one of the things I love about my department is the kinds of research my faculty do are they're things that really make a difference and really matter. And I feel like the motivation of most of the faculty is, we want to make a difference to help people. That's why we do. Well, that's why we study what we do. But I don't want to, and I think one of the struggles for parents of kids with special needs is we sometimes feel like we always want to tell the success stories. My child's living independently. They have their own apartment. They got married. They're the homecoming king, homecoming queen. You see those stories all the time, but it's not like that for lots of people, and it doesn't mean that they don't have lots of accomplishments and successes, but sometimes that's harder when your child may not be independent, and they always say, well, don't set limits, because then and that's I agree with that a whole lot. But there's also the part too about being realistic, and what we want for our child is that they can be happy in what they do, that they can have a dream that they can achieve in their life. But that's going to be different, for every child. And so when I write about this, I don't only want it to be these happy, oh, look how much they're like a typical kid, It's like, but I want you to see that there's joy and happiness in all kinds of different ways. But there's scary parts too, but all people have scary parts in their life. And I think that's the part, when you have a child with special needs, it makes you face that much more directly and kind of accept that that's part of life.
Yeah, I kind of think that normates, I've been reading the book by Amos Young. His brother was born with Down syndrome of Asian descent in California, and he describes normates as folks who imagine they have all the essential parts it takes to be fully human.
Yeah.
And 4 working limbs and a average to above average mind, and so forth and so on. 20/20 vision, and so forth and so on. And he describes how normates kind of assume they've got it together.
And I would say no, probably not.
Who was it? Was it Thoreau? Desperate lives seeking whatever. Ordinarily, I could quote that verbatim, but I'm in front of the camera and my mind is spinning. But in reality, folks with disabilities who are always living with the unknown, they are a mirror image of the rest of us, that we're living with the unknown
Yes.
too. Maybe they just learn to do it better because it's so obvious to them.
Right.
By faith is how they have to live.
Right. And I mean, another lesson that I've learned from Isaac is he lives in the moment. I've told you that before. I mean, he anticipates and he thinks about things, and he probably does that a little bit more as he's gotten older about, when's he going to see his mom, or he's going to camp right now. So, he does anticipate those types of things, but he also is very much in the moment. And I think that's that part when I talk about those magical moments are, I feel like I enjoy much more, like if I'm playing a game with him, or we're watching a movie together. That's talk about being fully human. I think it's being aware and appreciating and enjoying whatever situation you're in at the time that it's going on, because I think sometimes we spend so much of our life planning for everything that's going to ever happen that we don't live. And I think the living part is being human, not the planning part necessarily.
Yeah, and our culture celebrates speed and power.
Right.
As though they, okay, but you got to have it.
Right.
And you do. And I'm a person with delayed function. It is delayed. It doesn't mean without. Mm-hmm. And Isaac is delayed.
Yeah, he is.
He isn't without.
Right. And sometimes I have to remember that, even though, he'll be 12 this fall. And sometimes I have to sit down and just wait a few minutes, and then, especially if I'm asking him to do something, I think with Christopher, as a parent, it's like, okay, he's not doing, whatever I asked him to do, and so you have that kind of immediate response as a parent, beyond them or whatever. And with Isaac, there's going to be that little bit of delay, and so having to remember to step back, wait a little bit, and
everybody can learn from that, because we live in this culture that says if it doesn't happen in the next 3 seconds,
right,
it isn't going to happen.
Right.
And it's all over with.
Right.
But it's not.
Right.
It's not.
And we're very schedule. We always want to be on a schedule. And there's time. Definitely another lesson from him is sometimes you're in a place like, I can't do anything about this, so I'm not going to get upset. Okay, it's all right.
Ain't
no control.
Ain't it the truth?
Yeah. We're going to miss it, or we're going to be late. You get a lot. You definitely are much more that way, and about things. But I think ultimately that's a better way of living life, rather than constantly I'm being, I'm on this clock and I gotta be here, or wherever, and you're always kind of anxious about that all the time, and so.
Well, I want to make an advocacy point now that Stephanie Huffick makes, and her son Tim is a Down syndrome son, young man, has an older brother, and she makes the point when he needed eyeglasses that they went to the optician, and he was looking himself in the mirror with the different frames and squinting and making faces and so forth, and he coincidentally borrowed the line from Pinocchio and said, "Look at me, I look like a real boy now." And I think sometimes folks look at people with disabilities as less human, incomplete, not subhuman, but just not all there.
Right. Yeah.
I rather suspect, and I can resonate with this, he's your son.
Oh yeah.
And you feel rather strongly about that.
Yeah.
And we are an advocate show. I don't mind saying that.
Right.
We're on here to say people with disabilities are already real people.
Yeah. And like I said, he's very passionate. He's very, the enthusiasm he has for things, he's real. He's, I think that's the part where you go, he's real as it gets. And the feelings with him and the emotions with him are very raw, very real, very full. I think that's talking about completeness. I mean, that he's made me more complete as a person. You know,
that's what people with disabilities teaches us
right.
is we all have deficits,
right,
and they cause us to look inside ourselves
mm-hmm.
and say, in what way do I still need to develop?
Right. Oh, he definitely does that. You know, a lot of people, and this is the part too, when people from the outside, oh, you're a great dad and all that, but they don't see that, you know, it's like, I don't feel that way lots of times, you know, and I think that's that deficit part, but I'm always working on it, for sure, you know, and he definitely motivates me to, you know, keep thinking, how can I do this better? But I stumble along the way all the time, so.
And part of the reason I wanted to have you on the show, if we can segue into another segment, is about the issue of belonging.
Mm-hmm.
And this message, us having this conversation to the viewers, can be about what a greater community can get out of this, and hope that they will, in terms of contributions that large community can make.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I commend you. I have watched you and Tracy and Christopher and the primary relationships you've described, going to extended family around the country. Mm-hmm. I've seen your friendships on campus, and I have witnessed how you have included Isaac in everything. Mm-hmm. Christopher has I don't see everything.
Right.
I'm sure there's a lot.
Yeah.
They've had their moments,
right.
But he has, from a distance, done beautifully with a younger brother.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And all of that is, but what we really want, and you told the story to me when we talked about church, of one Christmas Eve you took Isaac to Crohn's Conservatory.
Mm-hmm.
Why there as an alternative to church?
Right, because it was hard in church. There's lots of people. He wasn't going to stay in a pew. Just that is an environment that he has a hard time with, and you gotta be quiet, typically, you know, and he's not going to be quiet. And you know, it's hard to be sitting in a pew where there's no room. You know, he's going to want to get out and wander around and walk and that type of thing. And so I thought, well, you know, they have the live nativity scene there, you know, so it's about the birth of Christ. But we can go there, we can walk around, and we did, like, several times. Christopher and Isaac and I went there, and it was cold, I remember that evening. You know, he did his thing of kind of walking through it several times, but got the full idea, and he would go, Jesus, and I was like, yep. And
why not stay home? Why did you need him exposed to the Christmas narrative?
Well, because I'm a person of faith, and that's part of my, as a parent, you know, I want him to learn and develop his faith as well.
It wasn't enough for him to know mom and dad and brother?
No, because God's been a big part of what's happened. I mean, he's gotten us through his surgeries and through some of the challenges that he has.
But what I'm pressing you on is you needed him included in that story.
Yes. Yeah, I want him to see it and be part of it.
But that's important to you as a dad.
Yeah.
I'm speaking,
right.
I'm playing devil's advocate, but
right.
darn
well, I want him to be part of the world, yeah, and that's not always easy.
To have relationships.
Mm-hmm. Because people have their expectations about how things should be, and he may not fit into that perfectly well, and so we end up, you know, we might have to leave or something. But I still have that, you know, that desire of trying to make sure he's included.
And if he's not, how's that feel?
It's hard. Yeah, it definitely is hard. I don't think it's an intentional thing lots of times. It's just not an awareness necessarily. But and I think sometimes people think I should have this answer too for how it should be accommodated. I don't always know. You know, it's like, it's more, you know, you're missing out on having time with Isaac when we're in an environment that may not work for him. And yes, I work on him in terms of things he should be expected to do, just like you would with any child, but some of that is going to still be very difficult for him.
And part of what I want to ask you by the Crohn's illustration is that you're intentional.
Mm-hmm.
Still, you're intentional about wanting to expose him to relationships
Yeah.
greater than just immediate family.
Oh, yeah.
You want him to have connections with the greater world.
Oh yeah, definitely. But I have to think about it sometimes, like what's going to work to make that happen.
And people viewing this,
Yeah.
whether they be employers or civic organizations in the community, medical community, and so forth and so on, need to know not just that this is, well, good luck with that, the medical people at the hospital, and they have counselors for all that now, you all go pay for an hour of counseling and that'll fix it and so forth. No.
Yeah.
Need everyday people
Right.
in everyday places,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
understanding and accepting. I mean,
Right.
that's my take.
Oh, I think so, and just being very, just open to it. I bring him to campus too. He's been, he comes to my office. He loves the campus at NKU, and he'll be, of course he's in school lots of times during the day, but there are other times that he's had a day off, and we'll bring him to campus, and he'll go up. He goes to our dean, gives him a hug, and he's gone into his office. But
Good.
there's,
Good.
those are my colleagues and friends, so there is an
Sure.
openness about, like, oh, it's Isaac, and they all know that he's going to come by.
But it hasn't always been that way.
Probably not. No, and that's something that that I've had to kind of teach them a little bit. But I think part of it, and I don't always do that intentionally. Sometimes I've just brought him there, and they've had to kind of learn that from him, from him directly, and giving him the opportunity to interact with them directly.
But the message is, if you live on a street and one of your neighbors has a person, special needs and so forth, it does make a difference.
It does. Yeah.
How you treat that person, that family.
Mm-hmm.
They feel it.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I've gone to a party or something several years ago, and there was a little boy there that wouldn't play with Isaac because he didn't want to play with him because he was sick. That's what he said. It's like, well, he's not ill, but he didn't really understand what Isaac had. But I've heard those things, and I've seen those things.
And we have to be gracious and understand
Mm-hmm.
what people don't understand.
Right.
And without judging them when they haven't had a chance to learn.
Right. Right. But on the other hand, there's two little girls who live next door to me who like to play with him all the time. So they don't really seem to even. I don't know if they understand he has Down syndrome or not. They just say, "Oh, it's Isaac. I want to play with Isaac."
But we do want to continue to encourage people to work at having relationships,
Mm-hmm.
not just with people with Down syndrome. People, somebody wrote recently, that canes and wheelchairs don't tell the story of disabilities.
No. Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of invisible
There are.
disabilities.
Right. And even when you see a visible disability, you don't really know what the situation is there. I mean, I know people make lots of assumptions about Isaac. They can tell he has, he's got some physical features that you can tell, well, he has Down syndrome. But what that means and what he's like, they don't know really anything about that until you begin to interact with them.
Any more than, and here's where I'm always planning to go with this. Did you know who you were before Isaac?
Mm-hmm.
I know I didn't know.
No, I don't. I mean, I'm different now than I was before. I do feel like I become more real about who I am and what I'm about, and he's taught me a lot about that. And so I don't. And part of it you would change, So there's that piece too. Like over time, you change anyway, but I have a lot more awareness about things about myself than I did before.
Didn't know what my potential and capabilities were.
And I would have, I talk about my research program, what this whole project is something I want to work on the rest of my career. 20 years, that would not have been something I would have thought of 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But Isaac has made that happen, and hopefully from what I do, that will make some difference for parents.
And that's a message that we as parents of children with disabilities, or if we happen to have disabilities ourselves, should communicate to is we don't regret our families. We might regret the suffering.
Yeah. Yeah, because I definitely, like, he's had 3 heart surgeries. I don't really care to go through that again. He may, there's a possibility he could still have another one down the road, and I don't really want to do that, but, we got through them, and...
But you don't want to throw any switch and say, I want to turn back time and not be Isaac's father.
No, I can't imagine, my life. I think my life would be empty without him. I mean, I feel like when I think back to where I was before that, and I had Christopher too, so I don't want to, because he's the other child.
But
so
it's the part of you that he's helped
Yeah.
discover,
Right.
helped you discover,
Right,
that would just lie dormant and unknown.
right,
So people with disabilities do teach us.
yeah, a lot. We have a program, the Supported Higher Education Program, that one of our special education faculty has led, and that's Dr. Missy Jones, and I met her a little while, I think, after Isaac was born, but I helped her connect with the Kentucky Kids Group, which is the Kentuckians Interested in Down Syndrome. It's a parent group here in Northern Kentucky. And she's always had an interest in that, and I think she has a sibling that had a disability as well. But I feel like kind of my connection helped affect what she ended up doing, and she's been a help to me too. She helped me get a sitter, previously. And this program, though, it was really amazing. It started several years ago, but it has brought students with intellectual disabilities onto campus.
Oh, do I ever know that? Because
Yeah.
you don't know that Dennis Flynn and Kelly
Yeah,
Flynn
there's
that were
Brody.
on the little over a year ago.
Yeah.
Dennis last week told me the story of his son Brody
Right.
going across the stage
It
at
was
graduation, and you being there embracing him when he
Yeah,
got to the other
I
side of
did,
the stage.
right? Yeah, because it was Colleen Dixon also, and they were people I first met when Isaac was born as part of that group, and that would never have happened. And to see that go take place on Northern's graduation stage, and there were 3 young people with Down syndrome who had completed the program. And Brody took courses in my department with faculty in my department, and he also worked at our radio station. And then Colleen helped out with the newspaper, and I helped make those connections happen.
And we do have those dreams for our children
Right.
of further education and marriage,
Right.
and conceivably even children of their own, and having jobs.
Right.
We do have those dreams.
And I think I mentioned to you too, just on the college campus. I mean, I do feel like students are more open about that than what they used to be if they've had, even if they have a mental health issue. And I have seen a change, because you had asked me this question a while ago about, well, how are the faculty about, people with special needs, and there really is a much more of an openness or an acceptance about that than I think there used to be. But I also think among students in college today, they've grown up being more exposed. We haven't hidden people as much as what we used to. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, Isaac probably wouldn't have been going to a public school.
Wouldn't even have thought about it.
No, and you certainly wouldn't see students coming to college.
Nope.
At all. And so. I have seen some progress with that, at least on Northern's campus, but I think that even nationally that's happening.
And I don't think you would have seen the parents like you who light up a little bit with hope now.
Yeah.
Because there's hope for their children.
Right. I mean, for me too, seeing Brody and Colleen walking across the stage, I'm like, Isaac might be able to do that too.
Life was just heavy.
Yeah.
Before.
Yeah. And again, I don't want to say there's never any, that's the part of there's always going to be those challenges.
We haven't arrived yet. Don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
There's plenty of challenges and barriers and everything still to come.
Right.
Next month's program is on employment, and we're still behind the 8 ball there.
There's a long way to go there. Yeah.
But it's feeling better.
Yeah.
Zach, you've shared online, social media, a number of things over time, including some quotes from the mighty, 35 things that would like parents of disabilities would like people to know. And I wanted to share some of these quotes with you because these are ones that impressed me. Okay. And you may agree or not agree. You told me you didn't agree with all of them. Don't feel sorry for us. Agree. But what does that mean? Is there discrimination against the disabled?
There is. Yeah, I would agree there is, yeah.
Don't feel sorry for us. Well, sometimes I think we do need to feel not sorry or pity,
right.
But as you and I have talked about, that the playing field isn't always.
No, it's not. And I think when you're thinking about discrimination, that disability is not something that people think of as an obvious form of it.
In sports, to use sports as a metaphor, we don't have to just use sports. You never have home field advantage.
Yeah.
You're always playing on someone else's court.
Right.
And you've got the fans there supporting, the home team fans supportive, and the home team knows all of the nooks and crannies of the court, and you're always the stranger,
right,
trying to figure it out. Or to use a non-sports metaphor, but yet a playing, my aunt, who was just 4 years old, when we were growing up together, and we would get together for holidays and family, we'd play card games and board games and so forth. She would teach me like Old Maid and things like that. And then at the end, she would say, "Mike, have you ever played 52 card roundup?" And I said, "No." And she'd throw the playing cards on the ground. Yeah. Well, if you have a disability, all games begin with 52 card roundup.
Yeah, that's a good way.
You got to pick up the pieces and start from there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's. Again, I think that when you look at the American for Disabilities Act, talk about reasonable accommodation. So what does that mean? And I think that's really hard to define what a reasonable accommodation is, and it's very individualized, based on the particular person. But what's reasonable? And I think that's the part that is kind of easy to take advantage of.
And I read something religiously that said, people with disabilities aren't looking to take from the people that have, and have compensation from them. They're just looking for fair for everybody.
Right. And that might be some kind of support that's provided that isn't taking away from someone else, but makes it possible for that person to participate more fully. Yeah.
Let's try another one. Define normal. What's normal in my house is not what's normal in your house or any other house, special needs or not. Normal is relative. Who is defining it? Please be sensitive to this. Everyone has a journey and they all take different roads and they're all beautiful, each in its own way. I love my normal.
Yeah. I think your normal is what is your routine in your daily life. I don't know if you always love it necessarily all the time, but it's how you make your life work. And that's going to be different for everybody.
Yeah, I want to stop short on that one from saying, everything is beautiful.
Yeah.
When I was down at, I hope they don't mind the commercial, Mental Health of America here in Northern Kentucky, and they'd have a Friday group who would come in, and some of the folks who were in recovery and just came in to get a lunchtime meal and to sit and watch some movie or television and so forth. And some of those people, that was the only normal they'd ever known. The only time that they were not in somebody's house or a setting that things were in total chaos and upheaval. So everything isn't beautiful.
No.
Every home isn't.
Right. I mean, if I think about, our nighttime routine, brushing Isaac's teeth is something that's very challenging because he has sensory issues in his mouth. So I had bought a special toothbrush that was for kids with sensory issues. It's like 3-sided, and he has a regular toothbrush that we put the toothpaste on, and then he's got a little one that fits over his finger because it's very hard to get in the back of his mouth. So we have to go through 3 rounds. That's our normal for brushing teeth, but it's the only way I can make sure that we get in there in his mouth because he does have some dental issues. And
yeah.
So that And that's a part of a routine thing we do, twice a day,
And
every
that's
single day.
and diversity in that sense is normal,
Right.
or can be, but dysfunction doesn't have to be normal.
Right.
Even though we may all have a certain degree of dysfunction,
Right.
it doesn't have to be toxic and
Right.
harmful.
Yeah.
So.
And I think, if your child brushes their teeth just fine, you'd think, wow, this is kind of strange having to do that. But you would be concerned, you would probably do the same thing if you're wanting to make sure that your child's getting appropriate, dental hygiene. You would come up with a system to make that work.
My children are a blessing, not a burden.
They are a blessing. There are things about situations that you're in that can be a burden, but they are a blessing. Yeah.
What was it mom said on that 70s show? Rosemary had a better baby than I did.
Yeah.
I mean, it all has its moments.
Right.
But by golly, mine are.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Blessing by far.
Everyone's looking for an answer to a way to fix him.
Yeah.
He's not broken. There is no answer. He writes his own book.
Right. People have a hard time with that, especially people that care about you, because I've kind of come up with the statement that this just is, and we deal with it, but there's not always going to be a solution or answer to this particular problem, and we may never figure it out, and that's okay. That's just how it is. But I do know when people care about you, they do offer a lot of suggestions without really knowing the whole situation, and they get kind of mad at you if you kind of say that's you don't implement it, or it's like, no, that's not going to work for us.
They don't.
I've had to work on that with people that friends and family.
I may look like super mom, but I'm really just mom.
Or dad. Yeah.
I really just want to give credit due where it should be. That's my son who gives me the inspiration to keep moving forward and never give up.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's definitely true. I mean, I'll go back to the heart surgery situation. His strength in that event, going through the 3 of those, is amazing. When I tell people the last one he had, which was 2 years ago, he went in on Tuesday, had, I think it was a 4 or 5 hour surgery. He was awake by the next day. By the end of that second day, he was up, even though he still had a lot of stuff hooked up to him. He wanted to walk. He went out of intensive care after one day, and then by, I think that was Wednesday, and then by Thursday, he walked up and down stairs. The PT's like, he doesn't need me, and he went home on Friday. I mean, it's like they opened him up and did all this stuff to his heart, and here he is. He's just like, I want to get up. The first thing I remember when he woke up, he goes, drink. That's the first thing he said.
Figuratively, they opened you up and did all. They opened your heart up too,
But that is, I mean, seeing him do that, and I know, and I shared, when he went home through social media with friends, and I think people that's inspiring. There's no way you can't look at something like that and see how he plows through that. I mean, anytime he's sick, he's like that. He doesn't sit there and whine about it. He just tries to get better as quick as he can.
It can be lonely. Please teach your children to respect and love, not fear or hate people who are different. Yeah. Nothing hurts more than watching my child be left out or ignored or left behind.
Yeah, that's hard. Like I said, that one time, that one child didn't want to play with him. But I will say, I do think there are kids who, for the most part, I know like Tracy takes them to the bookstore a lot, and the other kids, they do, they do engage with him without really any prompting. And he had a really good class this year with the typical class that he was part of, where he was I think that's gotten a look in some ways better as the kids have gotten older.
Why don't you talk about some of the adaptations?
So he's been at River Ridge Elementary here in Kenton County since 2008. He went to preschool there. He's kind of an entity there. He's had a variety of resource teachers as well as a typical classroom teacher. The past 2 years have been particularly very good. The resource teacher he had she always had the attitude like, I got to figure out what works with Isaac. She wanted to figure him out. And until this past year, he still wasn't recognizing his letters. But he knows them all now, and he's learning to read. And I give a lot of that credit to her because of her determination that she would just keep trying to come up with different ways to motivate him. They had instructional technology, through iPads, and for a while he had was a little box that would help with communication. But he, as I said, he's pretty verbal, but he doesn't speak with full, complete sentences, but enough that more and more folks are being able to kind of figure out what he is wanting. And so for the most part, we're not relying a lot on that type of technology, but like I said, her determination with him has been great. The typical classroom teacher, he's in the 5th grade there, she was great about really trying to get to know Isaac. And that hasn't always been the case with every one of the regular classroom teachers. Sometimes they have varied a bit in terms of their involvement with him, but and he's going to repeat 5th grade. We're not quite ready to go to middle school, but we wanted one more year because he was making some really good academic progress. So we want one more year to do that before we go to middle school, and he'll be in the same regular classroom teacher. His resource teacher is going to change though, so that we're a little bit disappointed because she's moving into a different position. But the principal there is great. He knows Isaac really well too, and has been wonderful. A lot of folks will talk about their IEPs being these big battles, and ours, that has not been our experience. They've really had a very supportive environment. And everything hasn't been totally 100% perfect there, but the motivation has always been, what can we do to help Isaac learn to read, to help him learn to write, to help him stay on task, because he also has ADHD, so the focus issue sometimes is a challenge for him. He is somewhat impulsive at times, and so but he's made great progress in school, I think due to the determination of his teachers with that. So,
no small part in terms of his home support too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I regularly it takes communication, obviously. So there's a lot of obvious emails that are exchanged. We would get a note every day about really knowing what happened that day. But we would talk through when problems would occur. He took the bus most days, but a couple of days a week when he was at his mother's, she would drive him to school, and opportunity for conversation at that point. So I think we worked well, with the teacher team, and they noted. She said that. She said that they don't always get that from all parents, in terms of that kind of interaction, but that ultimately benefits Isaac.
I have no doubt of that. That's why I asked if you would be a guest on the show. That I knew that you couldn't help but be an inspiration, you and Tracy, for what you have done with your son Isaac. And I wanted to share your story with the folks in Northern Kentucky. Yeah. I'm sure that everyone who has an opportunity to view this will receive greatly. Yeah. So from your story.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me on here and giving me the chance to tell Isaac's story, which I plan to do in lots of different formats, in the years ahead too.
That's super.
So, and really, the goal there, my goal really is to help other parents, navigate this process of being a parent of a kid with special needs.
And we need to collaborate.
Yeah.
I think that we especially need to be organized in the world of disabilities. I've always been supportive of folks in terms of the civil rights movement and discrimination, and more recently sexual orientation, but the folks that have lacked organization, and I'm biased, is folks with disabilities.
Yeah. Oh, I think there's a lot of advocacy work that needs to be done, and the environment has become more challenging, nationally and even at a state level. And I think it's going to be parents and other folks that are connected to the disability community that are going to have to really step up and do more advocacy.
Well, friend, Dr. Hart,
okay, thank you very much.
Keep sharing those stories.
Okay, great. Yeah. Thank you.